Those that are in marketing know that one of the greatest things you can have is really good word of mouth. Word of mouth marketing has been and still remains in the digital age very, very important. Well, I got to share with you something that I just experienced recently. A book that's out now called Talk Triggers, and it talks about that and how you can deploy this in your business to get a lot of the results that you want. And matter of fact, we're lucky today because joining me is my buddy Jay Baer, who's in his offices right now. He's the co-author of this. Jay, good to have you with us today.
Terry, thank you so much. Fantastic to be here. And indeed, word of mouth is the most important thing in business that we don't spend time thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for those of you that don't know Jay yet, I think there's like 2 people in Nebraska that don't know about you yet. But
everybody in Nebraska knows because I'm from Nebraska. So that
one
I got
covered. So,
maybe Iowa. Maybe Iowa.
Yeah, maybe Iowa. That's right. It could be. That's right. And being a guy from Michigan myself, a couple of Midwestern guys here, we know what it's like. But Jay is one of the world's most retweeted persons that are out there in digital marketing. He's a renowned business strategist, keynote speaker, and the New York Times bestselling author of five books.
Now six. This is 6, baby. So now we're 6. I got to update the bio.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he's got his company is Convince and Convert, and they own the world's #1 content marketing blog. And you want to get over and be sure and check it out. See what is there.
Thanks.
But I've got to say this. One of the things I particularly am fond about my brother here is that he was recently inducted into the Speaker Hall of Fame with the National Speakers Association, and now has the Council of Peers Award of Excellence Speaker Hall of Fame. And I'm proud to say I was part of that class of 2018, so we'd celebrate it together, my brother. High-fiving you across the miles, Jay.
High five, indeed. Thank you so much. Congratulations to you as well, my friend.
Thank you. Well, let's get into this book here because Talk Triggers is a book that is amazing. I went through and read it a couple of times, actually, and because there was so much good there. What I'd like to do is we're going to take a look at the book and some of the things that you talk about, if that's all right with you, sharing screen through the wonders of Zoom here. Do that, and let me click here, a couple little clicks, and then we go in there, and now we've got it right here that we're looking at what is there. I like what you say here. You say right now, word of mouth is more effective and important than ever for 3 key reasons. And this is in the book here, really, really good. And I wanted to go into it a little bit more in depth with you. You say it's hyper relevant. It also saves the recipient time, and it's independent as the talker has no financial interest in the sale of the service. Tell us a little bit more about that and how we can implement those kinds of things in our work.
Well, it's an interesting scenario in that the value of word of mouth and the persuasive power of word of mouth increases as we get more and more surrounded by products, by services, by companies, by ads, by appeals. And it's hard to make a decision. You may know the book Paradox of Choice by the fantastic professor and author Barry Schwartz, which says that as we have more and more choices, it becomes more and more difficult to make choices, right? I can't figure it out, right? It's like when you go to the grocery store and there's 114 different cereals in the cereal aisle. You're like, I don't know. Some sort of cornflakes would be fine. Word of mouth becomes even more important in this era because we have so many choices and there's so many people competing for our attention, for our dollars, that when somebody like you says to somebody that trusts you, hey, you know what? You should watch this show on Netflix, or I really like these shoes, or this is a great place to vacation. It takes on added importance in this sort of maelstrom of crazy that we're living in today.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of maelstrom of crazy that we have, that's a good phrase. I like that.
Thank
we
you.
look at social media, and some people might say, well, I don't really need the word of mouth anymore because we've got this wonderful thing called social media. And in your book, you share a quote there that I want to share with our viewers right now that I think is really good when you were talking about Andy Cernovets. He's a co-founder of Word of Mouth Marketing Association, author of the pioneering book, Word of Mouth Marketing. He says, social media is great for speed, but it's just a tool. Word of mouth is hard. Earning respect, earning recommendations, and launching deep ideas require a genuinely good company to provide a talk-worthy experience. What are your thoughts on what he said?
I couldn't agree more. And at some level, we have gone to sleep on the importance of word of mouth in business because of the rise of social media. We tend to conflate word of mouth and social media and say, well, we don't really need to worry about word of mouth because we have all this social media. But the reality is that the data show that 50% of all word of mouth is offline and 50% is online. So you need both. You need offline word of mouth and you need online word of mouth, typically through social media, ratings and reviews sites. So it really is a two-handed game of cards. Now, what I will tell you, though, is that our research shows that offline word of mouth has more persuasive power than social media, right? Because it stands to reason, right? If somebody just posts something on their Facebook feed and says, I like this book, that matters. But if I say, hey, Terry, you got to buy this book, that has a little more emphasis just because it's more personal, right? It's more directed, it's more human.
And particularly if it's someone that you respect and they're saying, hey, a good friend is telling me how to do it. That means a lot more than any tweet that I'm going to see.
Absolutely. Yep.
Those kind of things I think are very, very important. And so it's not a matter of either or. I think it's really both and. We want those, but I thought it was particularly interesting that even though you and I both work a lot with digital media and doing that, we're really big fans of it, but the personal, human to human kind of connection had just that slight advantage there.
Well, and I think you'll appreciate this, Terry. The reason that Daniel and I wrote this book, and the reason I write all my books, is always in reaction to questions I get from actual customers. And what was happening is we work with a lot of big companies in social media and content marketing and all those kind of things. And people were asking me, well, okay, we don't really know what to talk about in social media. And we don't really know what to talk about in content marketing. Like, we understand the mechanics now, but we don't really know what to say. And I thought, geez, if these big companies don't have a story to tell, a lot of people don't have a story to tell. And really the whole point of this book is giving your customers a story to tell, and then allowing them to become volunteer marketers on your behalf. And it's amazing here in this social era and this digital era that we still have to wind the clock back to the very beginning of marketing, which is word of mouth. I mean, let's remember, for a long time, word of mouth was the only marketing there was, right? Cavemen didn't have Twitter, right? They didn't even have billboards until somebody
Odd's computer wasn't really good there in the cave.
No. I guess somebody probably put ads on a cave wall, and that was the first outdoor board. But word of mouth was it for a long time. And even though we're surrounded by all this stuff now, it's still, I would say, more important than ever.
Yeah, I think so. And matter of fact, I would think that it's going to be important into the future as we go forward. Whatever the new whiz-bang technology will be, we still want to connect people to people, person to person level. And you talk about that with many different companies that are doing it right, from DoubleTree Hotels and their famous cookies. I love what you talk about with that. And then with Cheesecake Factory and what they do, and many others. One I thought was particularly helpful that I'd kind of like to share with our audience today is one that I've heard before. And you illustrate it here on your website, is the Uber Conference Hold.
Oh, love those guys.
Which is really interesting. It's a song, and we're hearing Alex Cornell, who's singing that song, talking about, I'm going to play just a little bit of that right now so we can hear that. Jace, for our viewers will be able to understand this and what it is.
Well, I've been sitting here all day, I've been sitting in this waiting room, and I've been waiting on my friends, yes, I'm waiting on this conference call.
Well, I'm going to pause it right there because that is pretty amazing. I remember when I heard it, I just thought, this is amazing. It's not just music in the background, but he says, I'm waiting on this conference call. Eventually they'll pick up. Tell us how that ties in with talk triggers and creating that positive word of mouth.
Well, the idea of a talk trigger is a strategic operational differentiator that you use to compel conversation, right? It forces your customers to tell somebody else that story about that special thing that you do. They can't help themselves. And where talk triggers work best is when you take something perfunctory and you do it in a way that customers do not expect. Is there anything more perfunctory, more average, more mundane and boring than on-hold music, right? It's always terrible. They said, well, what if we turn the on-hold music into something that you actually want to listen to? And Alex Cornell, who's the CEO of the company, recorded that song, and now it's taken on a life of its own. If you go to social media, you go to Twitter, for example, and search Uber conference plus on hold, you'll see tweet after tweet after tweet after tweet after tweet of people saying, I only use Uber conference because of the on hold music, right? It has been and is the story that customers tell each other. And let's be clear about this. The best way to grow any business, I don't care what your business is, the best way to grow any business is for your customers to do that growing for you. And they will do that if they have a story to tell. And your talk trigger, that different thing that you do, is and can become that story.
Absolutely. You know, those of you that are watching this is a book that I highly recommend getting it, because it's got some stories in there of many different companies and what they do. And you can find with the collection of all of those, go, ooh, I'm going to like what they did. Maybe not do the exact same thing, but twist it just a little bit this way to suit what we're doing. And you talk about that. And I love the way that you approach it. And you're going back, sharing screen here again, where you talk about the importance of having 4, 5, 6. This is the key of the book that you have. The 4 requirements of a talk trigger, the 5 types of talk triggers, and then 6 steps that create talk triggers. All of these are good. Now, I wish we had like 40 hours for this interview right now, so we could really go in depth. However, a more cost-effective way of doing that would be, well, just go out and get the book available at a fine store near you.
Get the book. It has alpacas on the cover, so you can't miss it.
Exactly. Those alpacas there, we see that. But what I want to do is, while we got you here, we're going to reach through the screen here, twist your arm just a little bit, not too much there, but a little bit, and talk about here where you talk about the 6 steps of talk triggers.
Yeah.
And you're looking at these right here. I particularly like these were good, but you're talking about getting close to your customers. Step number 2. Tell us a little bit more about that and companies that are getting particularly close in a real way that really contributes to the bottom line.
Terry, let me say this. There are a number of good books already on the shelf about word of mouth. Daniel and I don't need to, and certainly are not the pioneers in saying word of mouth is important. There's a number of good books about that, right? Contagious from Jonah Berger, Fizz from Ted Wright, Word of Mouth Marketing from Andy Cernovitz, who we mentioned a moment ago, and dozens of others. And most of those authors are interviewed and cited in our book. What this book contains, though, that those books don't typically, is an actual system. So knowing that word of mouth is important is one thing. Knowing how to create a word of mouth strategy and implement it, how to make a talk trigger, is quite another, which is why we have the 6-step process in the book and why we're so methodical about how to do this. And I will tell you, it's the exact same process that we use in our consulting firm to deliver talk triggers to brands every single day. So it's not like we just invented this from thin air. We actually use this and have tested it day by day. The key, though, and I see this all the time when I give presentations about talk triggers, people come up to me and say, great idea, we need more word of mouth. Yes, we believe you. We're going to have a brainstorm in the company and come up with some good idea. And I'm like, no, don't do that. That is not the right way to do it. Because if it was that easy, if all you had to do was get in a room and come up with a good idea, you'd already have one, right? If it was that simple, you'd already do it. The key to having an effective talk trigger is to understand what your customers expect from you.
What a concept.
And that requires you to get close to your customers. Because look, here's the truth, right? This is some real talk here. Marketers don't usually know what customers want. We're supposed to, we're paid to know that, but we don't, because marketers don't actually talk to customers anymore. Like you and I are old enough to remember the day when we did. Like my boss in my first company that I worked as an intern, I was like 17 in Phoenix, said, no good marketing will happen at your desk. And he encouraged us to leave the office, right? Like go visit customers, go visit our customers' customers. That's where insights come from. And today, especially because we're so festooned with digital marketing alternatives, now we just want to press a button and a report spits out. And we take that report and say that equals insights, but it doesn't. So what we recommend in this talk trigger system is that you do a bunch of interviews with your customers. Typically, we want you to ask some questions of new customers, longtime customers, and lost customers. And what we want to get at is what do you expect at every stage of the customer journey, right? So I'll give you a real world example that might help.
Please.
In a professional services business like mine, one of the key kind of inflection points is you give the customer a proposal, right? At some point, somebody gets a proposal. Now, what customers expect when you interview them may be, well, you will email us a PDF of the proposal, right? That is the perfunctory, average, mundane approach. That is the regular on-hold music, if you will. Well, if you know that they expect you to send a PDF of the proposal, what if instead you sent them a sheet cake. And the sheet cake frosting was made to look like the cover of the proposal. The proposal itself was printed out and put in a laminated sleeve underneath the cake. So in order to get your proposal, your customer had to eat an entire sheet cake. That would be a talk trigger. That would be a story that customer would tell. But you can't figure all that out unless you know what they expect, because once you know what they expect, you know what they don't expect. And what they don't expect is where the talk trigger lives.
Yep, I think so. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like what we need to tell marketers, and we're all in marketing, is that we got to put aside some of our we think we know it all. We think we know what they want because of fill in the blank, but we need to get out there and actually talk to them.
Every single time I talk to a customer or my customer's customers, I learn something. I've never in my entire long career had a customer conversation that was unproductive, ever.
Yep, I think that's really important. And when you look at it, now, one thing I want to ask you about here is we do a lot with digital communication. You and I use tools like Zoom here and others a lot. What would you see as would be the advantages and disadvantages, or the balance that we'd want to achieve between using telephone, Zoom, Skype, et cetera, and physically going out into the field, seeing them, shaking their hand, being there in person?
Clearly being there face-to-face is going to have a little bit of an advantage. I think you can pick up on a little bit more body language cues, and also being in the customer's physical environment, you can learn some things or pick up on some things that might be interesting. That being said, as a practical matter, I think doing interviews via Zoom or Skype or things like that are fine. And realistically, we do a lot of phone interviews as well. This kind of work, this kind of anthropological investigation of your customers as a precursor to creating a talk trigger probably shouldn't be done via an email survey, because you just can't quite pick up enough nuance. You just can't do a lot of the sort of follow-up questions that really might help you. So I would say phone is least good. Zoom would be second. In person would be best.
Yeah, so if you can do the in-person, by all means do that. And that means training some of the salespeople who are out there seeing people, and those who are frontline connections with the customer. They're really all part of the marketing effort in good companies when they do it. One other thing I want to leave you on, and again, I wish we had like 30 hours here, but we do need to wrap up.
I got nothing to do. Let's just hang. Yeah, it's all good. We'll just...
Exactly. You say something here I thought was really, really good. You say talk triggers are about stories. Yeah. USPs, that unique selling proposition we've heard about, is about a bullet point. Tell me a little bit about the differences between those, between talk trigger as a story and a USP as a bullet point.
Let me give you a talk trigger example that will help frame that up. So one of my favorite examples from the book is from a restaurant in Sacramento, California called Skip's Kitchen. Skip's is a counter service restaurant. You walk to the counter, you order your food, they bring your food out to you when it's ready. Pretty simple. Lots of restaurants like that. Skip's, however, has spent $0 on advertising ever in 10 years. Zero. They also were recently named the 29th best hamburger restaurant in America by USA Today newspaper. And the way they are able to make this work is that before you pay, after you order, but before you pay, they say, hey, hold on a second, let's try something. And the counter person whips out a deck of cards from underneath the counter, fans them out in front of you, face down, and says, Terry, pick a card. And you pick a card, and if you get a joker, your entire meal is free, whether it's just for you or an entire high school baseball team.
Yeah, now, as you mentioned in the book, they had a whole team there.
A whole team. On average, 3 people a day win, and when they win, they go crazy, right? They're taking patty melt selfies, and they're calling their mom, and they're putting reviews on Yelp and TripAdvisor. It's like a big hullabaloo. People go Facebook Live. It's like a whole thing, right? And that notion of just giving people, that's a story that somebody is going to tell, right? We have really good burgers, and instead of using buns, we use English muffins. That's a USP, right? USPs are a product or service difference that's typically rooted in competency. A talk trigger is a story, right? And what we're really trying to get is people to tell stories, because people don't have conversations about bullet points. It's not a very interesting story to tell. So one of the things that we say is that a USP gets shared in a conference room, and a talk trigger gets shared in a bar, right? It's a story that people tell. And the key to that story, though, is that it is different. It is interesting. It is dynamic. one of the mistakes we make in business is that we assume that competency creates conversation, that if we focus on being a good business, that will create word of mouth. But the problem, Terry, is that all your competitors are good too. That's not noteworthy. Being good isn't noteworthy. Everybody is good. To be so much better than your competition that it creates customer stories is possible, but that's a very high bar to clear. Only a few companies can make that stick. So you're better off continuing to be good, of course, but to do one thing different, to play the card game, to give somebody a warm chocolate chip cookie, to have an enormous menu, do one thing different that spawns those stories. And when you do that, your customers become volunteer marketers.
I like that. Having those volunteer markers, very important. And I'm going to close with a thought that you shared from a mutual friend of ours, Sally Hogshead, also a member of the Hall of Fame, a great speaker, which she said, different is better than better. And it seems like that's what you're talking about here as well.
Yes. Because people don't talk about better. They talk about different. That doesn't mean better isn't a worthy operational goal. Of course it is. But one of the ways to think about this from a marketing standpoint is that better competency keeps customers. Different talk triggers creates customers because they're more likely to tell the story of different than they are to tell the story of better. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So certainly you don't want to have poor operational quality, right?
That's a given.
Yeah. And let me just say, no talk trigger is strong enough to survive a terrible customer experience, right? So you can't be like, well, we run a pretty bad business, but we have this amazing talk trigger. Like, that's not what I'm saying, right? That's not the idea here. The idea is that you continue to run a good business, but you do one thing different that people notice. Like Jay Sofer, the locksmith in the book we talk about, when he finishes working on your locks, he does a security audit of your whole premises and then oils every window and door lock in your house. And he does that for free. That's his talk trigger.
Yeah,
right?
just one of those things.
That's it, right? So you just have to say, what's one thing we can do that people don't expect? And when you make that happen, and it really is operations, right? And this is about marketing and that, but it's important to recognize a talk trigger isn't marketing. It's an operational decision that creates a marketing advantage, but it's not marketing. It's not a promotion. It's not a price. It's not a campaign. It's not a coupon. It's not a contest. A talk trigger is something you do different, not something you say different.
Exactly. It's really important. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Jay Baer. He's the co-author with Daniel Lemon of the book that's out there. And matter of fact, I'm going to let you see right now. We can do this today. It is now out there. Talk Triggers, the complete guide to creating customers with word of mouth. Wonderful. You'll recognize the book this way. Bounce over there, and for a few coins, you can get it. And think about it. You're going to invest a little bit there, and it's going to be well worth it because the stories here are there. Matter of fact, one of the things that I really like that both of you put in there is great stories, lots of ideas we can use, and then at the end, action plan. Here's a step-by-step how to do it. Here are some points that are really good that I could take with my whole team and sit down and go over and go, oh, this would be important. Mary, you do this. Bob, you do this. Sally, you're going to do this, etc. The way you put that together, really good. Thank you for doing that. But before we let you go, any final words that you want to leave for that viewer who's looking at this and thinking, this sounds really interesting?
One final word. It's a book about word of mouth. We thought, well, if it's a book about word of mouth, there should be some sort of word of mouth elements in the book. Stands to reason, right? That's one of the reasons why the book has alpacas on the cover. But the other thing that you might not know, Terry, because I don't think you have a hard copy, is on the back here, right there.
Yeah.
It says, satisfaction guaranteed. If you bought this book and didn't like it, go to talktriggers.com and send the authors, that's me, a note. They will buy you any other book of your choosing. And we will. So you have literally no excuse to not buy this book, because if for some reason you don't like it, I think you will. But if you don't, you let me know. I will buy you any book. You want a first edition Bible? We will hunt one down. We do not care. We are that confident in this book. We will buy you anything you want. So there's really no reason to not buy it because you have no risk.
I like that. That is definitely a differentiating factor for you.
It is a talk trigger, is what it is.
Exactly. That trigger, which is really good. Seriously, Jay, you've done a great job with it. Please tell Daniel we said hello, and it's a great book. And for those of you watching this, pick it up. It's going to be a good investment. The time, money, and energy you put into it will help you a lot. I'm Terry Brock. Thank you very much for joining us today.